Hi everyone, this is Kelly from Truth in Story, and there might be a little bit of road noise and a little bit of shadow, but it is too beautiful out to shut the window. But if as soon as I said that, a whole bunch of cars went back by. It's not usually actually quite that busy, but we'll see. It should be of no surprise to anybody that I am doing a first impressions of the Literary Witches Oracle that just came out recently. Now, this was a book first. I have on good authority to purchase it, the book in Kindle format. I do try. I struggled because right now, as of the time of filming this, which is the 28th of August, 2019, it's on Amazon for like $7.32, which is fantastic. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I'm trying not to, again, small space, so I'm trying to not accumulate books that I'm okay with them being in Kindle format. So I have the Kindle version. We'll talk about that in comparison to the little guidebook when we get there in a second, but they're not the exact same at all, and I would actually recommend having both, but that's me personally. Now, as some of you know who have been following me for a while on YouTube, I am a literature major person. I have a degree in writing. I have associates in writing. I have a bachelor's in literature and writing, and I have all of my masters except for my thesis. So I've done all my classes and was just starting to deal with my thesis when my son's health took a turn for the worse, and so all that just kind of went on hold. But that's also in literature with a focus on monster and sort of folktale, that type of thing. So literature is really important to me. I've read a lot of books in my life, love books, and I have spent a lot of, I went to school slowly for all of those things. Taking just a class or two a semester, it kept me sane as a mother, stay-at-home mom, and my kids were both taught at home because of my son's health issues, so that was my space outside of house, right? And so I was really excited to see this because for me, and Larissa, who recommended this deck to me and told me about the book, who has a channel called The Bard's Lament, and she has an Instagram account called Green Witch. I'll put it in the description box below, because she did recommend the book to me a while back, and then she got hers first and said, yeah, you're going to want this. So I'm like, okay. She literally said that to me yesterday, and I went and got it today. I listened to Larissa. So we've been talking about this, like we share a love of story and literature and this type of thing, and so we've talked a lot about that kind of understanding that for me, story has a capital S. It's very similar to me as saying source, spirit, divine. Story for me with the capital S is energy. It is magic. It is that which runs through human history and intertwines with human reality in a powerful way. And so I do put a lot of weight to the concept of story, and I also put a lot of weight to the concept of storytellers. They're not the same thing to me as just a writer. If you say, oh, that person's a writer, or that person does this or does that, a storyteller. Like, there are writers and then there are storytellers. Not all storytellers can be writers, but not all writers are necessarily storytellers in this imagination of myself, or in the way that I see things working. But storytellers are people who are magic, right? They are, and any good writer and any good storyteller and people who do work a lot with reading, analyzing stories, that kind of thing, it does teach you, either naturally you already have it, and then you enhance it by teaching, or you learn it and you put the hard work in to see connections, to build pathways and connections. It's the art of actually making pieces of the web, those connecting points, that can be so very powerful. So for me, storytelling is as much magic as, I'll say, a magician or a sorceress. For me, you can say the same thing about a storyteller with a capital S. And you can see this isn't a new concept, right? The idea of bards and storytellers, certainly in Celtic lore, which I would have the most connection with, that concept is nothing new in lore and legends of the great bards and great storytellers across time. So that's a pretty well established by some ways of thoughts thinking. I'm not talking very well for someone who apparently reads a lot. So my point is, this is really exciting to me. Now, would I have, you know how I feel, I'm just going to get these things out of the way. Would I have loved this to have just been a literary witches oracle filled with men and women? Yes. However, I do want to say, in this case, I really actually do appreciate, I don't generally like all female decks. I don't generally like all male decks. Not that there's very many of them. I like to have balanced decks, right? That's just me. If some people, clearly lots of people don't mind that. There are so many, all feminine decks, all female decks, all divine feminine decks, or heavily divine feminine decks out there, that clearly a lot of people do really love them and purchase them. So that's fine. But as a personal preference, I love to see a balance. That's what I'm striving for, and I tend to look for in my decks. Now, I will say, from a personal perspective, I do really love because when you obviously, if you study literature in college, there is, or there can be, a subsection of looking at women's lit, right? There's a whole people will specialize and focus in on women's lit. And while my focus was not women's lit, it was something that I took quite a lot of classes in. And there is something really powerful about people like Mary Shelley, who were young and female in the this was written in 1818, right? Or it was probably written before that, but it was published in 1818. And that a female, young female in that time frame and in that time environment was able to write this, and B, get this published, even though, there was some changes made. I recommend doing the 1818 version versus the later version. But there is something really powerful about the scope of women's literature, especially as a female, right? To be able to see that scope, because there has been difficulties, obviously, in publishing and having voices heard, and having to publish under male names if you wanted to have anything A, published, or B, have a degree of success with it. Not people broke that mold, but as a general rule, having to have people write, sometimes there were publishers who would publish a woman's book, but there was a forward in there sort of giving approval by a man, saying that, I know that she's a woman and she's writing this book, but she's a good mother, or she's a good woman, she's doing her duties and she's doing all these things, but then here's this offering that she has. So there was almost like a permission slip written into the fronts of the books. Like, there's just so many different things, layers there, right? As a woman, and I was a woman who loves literature, there is something really powerful there for me to have this deck as it is. So I am not going to belabor that point too much. And that is not to say that that doesn't happen in other subsets of literature, but in this case we're talking about female literature, or women's lit, right? So, okay, enough. I know this is not, again, this isn't going to be short. I will put, there again, there are plenty, just to, let's just, you know, I get this the most messages probably about this. My videos are not short. There are always rambly starts. This will be no exception. This entire video will probably have some degree of rambling in it. And there are many, many YouTube videos out there that do flip-throughs of decks. And if that's what you're looking for, I'll put a timestamp to when the deck starts being walked through. But that doesn't mean that it's going to become any more of a quick flip-through. So this may, you know, I might save you at this point that you're watching this from that. Although you can probably see that by the length of time, right? That how long the video itself is. So just, you know, if it's not your jam, I totally get it. But warnings have been given. I should have done that at the very beginning. So one of the exciting things for me, I've already looked through this book. I've actually got it kind of, or this deck, I've got it kind of organized in a particular way that I want to look at. But I just want to point out, before I put these away, I want to point out the things that I'm really excited about and the one disappointment. It would have been perfection to have had Marge Piercy in this collection. As I said, I had already started the process of writing my thesis. You know, when you're gearing up towards that, obviously a lot of the papers that you're writing in your classes prior to writing the thesis are surrounding the topic as well. So I've written several 30-page papers, I know, on the topic that were going to sort of become the base for my thesis. And the two books that I was using for my thesis was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Angela Carter's Nights at the Circus. And sort of as if these two were in conversation across, you know, time. This was, I should know off the top of my head, but this was published, it's been a while. She was born in 1940, but that's not when Nights at the Circus was published. 1984. So this was published in 1984. This was published in 1818. So that's a big gap. A lot of things had changed, and yet, right, a lot of things had also stayed the same in the conversation. And there is a beautiful, I think, conversation going on between these two books. But anyways, so these were the books that I was focusing on. So I was so excited. This didn't surprise me that Mary Shelley would be there. I really wasn't necessarily expecting that Angela Carter would be in there. I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, there's a lot of women writers out there, and there are only 30 that are in this deck. So who knew? But Angela Carter was in there. So excited about that. I was also so excited to see that Octavia Butler was in there, and I would not have expected that either, because, and not because she's an amazing author. I think I have all of her books. Fledgling is one of my absolute favorites. It's not for the weak of heart. It's not for the faint of heart. It is a vampire-based style type. And I don't give anything away because it says that on the very front of it. But it is an amazing twist at a vampire concept. And I think it was one of the amazing openings to a vampire book. But she's not really, I wouldn't say that she's known for Fledgling. She's definitely known for probably Kindred, probably the Parable of the Talents. So she has quite, Parable of the Sowers, I would say probably Wild Seed, so more of those. I don't know that she's even known for Fledgling, but I love Fledgling. But again, this is more of a, she writes more, let's say, science fiction, vampires, this type of thing, but does so in a really amazing voice. So I was so excited to see that she was in there. So sad, because I would, you know, if I'm looking at these kinds of books, the other book that I would definitely place in this category would be He, She, and It by Marge Piercy. Her Woman on the Edge of Time also is absolutely amazing. I've written papers on both of them, but He, She, and It is one of my favorite books. It goes back and forth between has a conversation, but within the single book, between a Jewish ghetto right when they were starting to put everybody in sort of ghetto areas, but before, I think, the full, or just as they were starting to maybe start to see where the Holocaust was going, and then into the future where there are cyborgs and things of that nature. But it is an amazing conversation between those two things, and just in terms of conversation about what it means to be human. And loved it. So that, you know, I would have just loved to have seen Marge Pierce. You can't have it all, and it's no condemnation, but I couldn't look at these books without, you know, looking at this one. So yeah, so there we go. So as I said, this is an oracle deck that was made after the making of the book. So the book wasn't made as a guidebook for this. It's actually a standalone book, and then they took the art from that book and made and then added more cards to it and made the oracle deck. And so the book is a standalone and the deck is a standalone. I think to really get the full thing, having both of those, and you'll see why in a few minutes. But I do want to take a look real quick at the guidebook and things without in conjunction with the book, because, you know, you should be able to just take what's given to you in a deck with book combo or guidebook and be able to run with it. You know, you shouldn't be required to purchase something else on top of it. So I'm going to first look at it in that way. So it's called the Literary Witches Oracle. It's a 70 card deck and guidebook written by Tasia. I don't know if it's Tasia or Tasia Kitaskia. Oh, I know I'm slaughtering that, and I am so sorry. Illustrated by Katie Horan, I believe is the thing. It is published by, good question, Clarkson Potter. It has a real nice linen feel to it. It's a nice like clamshell box. There's no magnetic anything to it. It's just a free-flying thing, but it feels really nice in hand. Everything's in there nice. It's got a great linen feel to it. I love the gray tones with the sort of salmon color tones. It's very aesthetically pleasing. It has, as if it was a book on a shelf, of course, the Literary Witches Oracle. I have one of the cards is on the side, and we have another one of the cards, or art from one of the cards on the front. It says, unearth the wisdom of the witchiest women in literary history, and let their brilliance illuminate your path. Drawn from the book Literary Witches, a celebration of magical women writers, the cards in this oracle deck bear portraits of powerful female authors and mystical spell ingredients, both full of symbolism meant to nourish the witch that lives within you. The term witch in this case, I am fine with. This isn't a deck, in my opinion, that is geared just towards witches. It's also not a bunch of women who were actual practicing witches or anything of that nature. It's recognizing sort of the magic that these women have tapped into. The guidebook is quite thin that comes with it. No page numbers, but there's not too many pages here. But it does, I think, give you a place to start and use this as an oracle without having to purchase the rest of it. But I do think that, as I'll show you in a minute, there is, you lose the creative component of the book, which is really beautiful. So I don't know if they even say in here. No, so I guess we'll talk about it when we look at the book real quick. Well, maybe we'll do that, because I do want to talk about that real quick. Because there is a section in the book, whoops, and I don't know how, again, this isn't going to show up as well, because it's hard to get screens on screens. So I'm going to turn the brightness down, because that can often help. There we go. So she, in the preface of the book, the author says, why would we dare call someone a literary witch? And so I want to read that real quickly because I think it does make sense as to why they've titled it this. Because all artists are magicians, and witches wield a special magic. Witches and women writers alike dwell in creativity, mystery, and other worlds. They aren't afraid to live alone in the woods of their imagination or to live in huts of their own making. They're not afraid of the dark. Or they are afraid of the dark, but they're still willing to go in it, I would maybe qualify. As such, the mantle of literary witch is the highest honor we can bestow upon an author. The 30 writers included here inspire us deeply, urging us to be creatively courageous. We crafted their portraits in art and writing to pay homage to their presences and to access their spirits through our own mediums. Due to time, space, and seniority, long practicing witches must be noted before newly initiated witches. The authors that follow make up only a single shelf of our role model library. We hope that you will celebrate them with us, read their works, and go out and create your own canon of literary witches. So I thought that was neat. She also does go into talking about the origin of witch and the meaning sort of wise or to bend or willow, being able to move. They talk about how the witches would be intelligent, resilient, who change with the times and are able to kind of navigate changing times, and that they are traditionally females, while other terms for women like wife, sister, mother, virgin, whore, these types of names are classifications based on our relationship to other people. Now, I would argue so is father, brother, son, you know, all of those things occur for men as well. But the witch is a female archetype that just is on its own. It doesn't have anything to do with how they're connected to another person. Which I would argue you could say a magician is similar to the man who's, you know, is always in conjunction with mother or father, son, brother, these types of things. So I think you can find the same thing across, but I can understand why they would use the word witches there. So anyway, so she goes into it a little bit more, obviously, in the book, because there's more space to do so, and so we have a little bit more, can tap into that a little bit as to why this was created, because again, reminder, book was first. This was taken from the book itself. So you don't get that sort of explanation there, at least not as of yet. Talking about reading with the cards, gives you a single card layout and like 2 examples if you got that, a past, present, and future layout and an example of what that reading might look like, and then you know, a reminder to make the cards your own as you read them. And then as it goes in, let me zoom in a little bit so that you can see that. As you go in, you can see there's quite a small space for each. You do get a color representation of the card. You get the name of the literary witch, her main title that is on the or main keyword that is on the card itself, in this case endurance, then a couple keywords: staying with pain, avoiding pain, patience. And then there is a little blurb. Now this little blurb is in the book itself. I'll show you what you're missing though in the guidebook. So this says Anna Akhmatova, not probably good, 1889 to 1966, was celebrated during and beyond her lifetime for her lyric, melancholy poetry. As Russia fell under Stalin, Akhmatova, I'm guessing, I'm so sorry, and her circle of artists and intellectuals were persecuted for their work. Her son was imprisoned and sent to labor camps, and her husband was executed. Akhmatova's most famous poem, Requiem, is her boldest attempt at capturing the Stalinist terror. So we have that blurb here. Now I'll take this as an opportunity. Let me find her. They are not in the same order here as they are in the book. This guidebook does have them alphabetized by the last name. Thank you for being able to quickly find it. Whereas the guidebook or the book itself is not in alphabetical order of any kind. So in the book, we have great Russian poet, the date. You have a full-size image of the card itself. Or of course, it wasn't a card. That was the artwork for this creative book. And then there is a written, I would say, poetic prose. You could say poetry. I would probably label it as poetic prose in 3 parts for each one. So for example, let me read this because I just read this part. After Stalin threatens her family, Anna fires up the cauldron. Ingo, the ripped pages of forbidden manuscripts, the sodden papers become bandages for the wounded. The bitter broth gulped down so the words are never forgotten. The deaths of Anna's people are woven into her shawl. She sucks on these silver threads during the famine to stay alive. Anna waits in line for rations of potatoes, cabbage, and milk. When it's her turn, the government official slips Anna a strange object. "You must tell our story," she says. Anna looks down and sees a golden egg. She can hear the wild heart of her nation beating inside. So you can see it is a poetic prose in 3 parts that describes the author artistically, while there is the image that obviously is describing or showing the author as well. So it is a artistic on visual front as well as in written front, and then there is that blurb about, more specifically about the author that is in this guidebook. And then there are recommended readings. So she suggests poems of Akhmatova translated by Stanley Kunitz, epic masterpiece Requiem, and lyric beauties that the author recommends is Willow, Lot's Wife, and The Last Toast. So they each have several recommendations for that authoress, or that literary witch, or that storyteller with a capital S, for you to check out. So out of that, you're getting obviously the artistic image, and you're getting the blurb, which is helpful, but you're missing that beautiful artistic version of written poetic prose that I think is really kind of, if you love literature, which you probably do or you wouldn't be buying this, I think you'll probably really love to see that. So this is what you get, though. This is what we have to work with. And then all the way through, so there are 30 author cards, and those are the same 30 authors that are in the book. And then they have they call the Witch's Materials. And this is a 40 card deck that is more akin to like Lenormand or Kipper, or like the Mildred Payne, very feeling like the Mildred Payne, where we have these objects, and many of them are, if not all, I would say not all, but the majority are directly related to the different literary witches here, and I'll show you that in a minute and how I organize the cards. So this, you just get an image of the card, and then you have like 3 keywords: the senses, hunger, sex for the apple, togetherness, work, treasures for the bees, and so forth. Of course, these style decks are just so easy to just roll with your own intuitive hits on what those particular objects say to you in the compass of that reading. So I was a little bit hesitant when I first saw this was coming out to have this beautiful artwork here, and then this very distinctly different. These are not in the book itself. These aren't referenced, but most of these are referenced somewhere in the images, which I will talk about. But I was kind of like, I'm not sure that that's going to work, but they actually look really beautiful together, and I think I would probably pull a literary card and then pull maybe like 3 to 4 3 to 4, I don't ever do 4, 3 to 5, I probably would do 3 of these to then get their message, but you know, we'll play around with that in a minute. So that's what you get with the guidebook, very small. It's probably, they probably realized that most people buying this would have already had the book, and or if they're interested in something like this, they're probably going to be already get the book, so they're not going to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So there's the guidebook. Again, it's really lovely. This is paper in here, but there's nothing that the cards can fall down in there. It has the ribbon to get them out easily. So love the box. The cards, I have these put out because I want to talk about how I have this, but the cards are really beautiful. I will be at the end of this video trimming this deck because the images are quite contained. Even these right there, it's very contained in this background, and then the cards for the artists are very contained by this. So it is literally just an extra white border, and then the back has that white border there. So I am going to be trimming these down to, I think they're going to look really beautiful that way. So that's my intention here. Here's the backs. It looks very fortune tellery. I like them. And then the front, again, you've got these two different styles. Full art or very Lenormand-esque fortune-telling style deck that is very separate, but they actually, I do like them more than I thought I would. So the way that I have organized these is the order of the book, which is, I think I have them ordered by the book. No, I might have them alphabetical. No, I don't. Nope, it's by the book. And I also have them with the magical items that I can either are in the cards themselves, or for whatever reason I thought, oh, that's associated with them. And so that's kind of how I just did this. You can see that there are a connection. Now, there are some extra cards that I would say that I didn't find directly related. I have not read all of these works. So somebody else might see, oh, that chicken should, actually I know who the chicken should probably go with, might say, oh, I know who the pawn should go with XYZ because of this particular piece of writing that I had never read. So this was just my best guesstimate, but the majority, there are 40 of these cards, and the majority of them are, you can see their association with the author or the author's works. And I thought that was pretty cool. They're not just randomly chosen, so to speak. So we're starting out with Emily Bronte, and they have her as fantasy. That's the keyword that they have. Of course, on all of these, there are probably so many different keywords that can be used. I do like the inclusion of a main keyword for them because I think it will make it more functional as a oracle deck. So I do like to see that. I think maybe some people won't, because you can't just take Emily Bronte and say have one word, right? But at least it causes a deck to be able to function as an oracle deck, which is the purpose of this. So I do think that inclusion is very helpful. And so in the book itself, it talks about how she lives a very mundane life, and yet in her she's peopled her world. When she looks out onto the moors from the window of her house, she is creating these sweeping fantasy stories. Not fantasy as in elves, but made up worlds that she's creating in a very mundane existence. And so I thought that was a good keyword. So here we have Emily Bronte, and so I put house with that because they've kind of focused on that idea with her. And there is an actual house in the card. It's not the exact, sometimes it's the exact image. This one is not, but it does have that. Then we have my lovely Octavia Butler. Now this was one that was very difficult to find. There wasn't to me an exact representation. There would have need to have been like something more alien looking in some way. I don't know. There needed to be something. that I didn't see anything that directly related to this, but I did put the boar here only because in the deck the boar is very much related to masculinity, and probably masculinity in a more an aggressive form, and certainly those are topics that Octavia Butler was discussing and speaking of. So this one didn't have a direct correlation, but I will say most of them did. So here we have Octavia Butler with lots of cool things here. The blurb for this is just kind of points out that she was a housekeeper and a shoe shiner, and she was a pioneer in a very white and very, I shall say, male-dominated genre of science fiction. She received a MacArthur Genius Grant for her dark philosophical novels and stories, which feature black female protagonists and explore power dynamics between sexes, races, and species, for sure. So that's the blurb that you would get in the guidebook, but then there is that artistic that you would get, which I quite love, because I can't read them all, right? It would be even crazy long. But I like at the end to talk about her going to a store and things that she's doing. But then at the very end, they say, walking back from the store, Octavia covertly tosses the seeds she always keeps in her pockets into her neighbors' yards. Seeds that won't save us, but urge we can do better, right? Much of you can see that in a lot of her works. We can do better than what we're doing. And so, yeah, I loved that in the book. That was not in the guidebook. So, yes, very excited to see her. I kind of put her with the boar. That was kind of stretching it, but it kind of works. Here we have Shirley Jackson, and she was an American horror writer, and so I put, because I do in this image they have a tipped over teacup, so I kind of associated the teacup with this. There's also a ghost card. Some of these cards also could, go for more than one. I was just trying to get a feel in my own head for whether these items were just picked randomly or if they were connected to the literary riches. And I do feel like they did a great job connecting them to the literary riches. And that, to me, was like an extra 2 thumbs up, right? One of the books that are the stories that I most remember her for was a story called The Lottery. She also wrote The Haunting of Hill House, which is now a really popular television or Netflix show. I think it's on Netflix. Hers is Family there, and then we have the teacup flipped over. Here we have, it looks like Eileen Chang for Fate. I loved the story here. This was not somebody I was familiar with, but they say she is a giant of modern Chinese literature. She passed away in 1995, so definitely more on the modern end of things. But I loved the poetic thing that was written about her climbing down moonbeams into a special room and then climbing herself back out and escaping through the moonbeam. And then becoming the ruler of her own prison, so to speak. I just thought that was really beautifully done. I have not read any of her works. I will definitely be looking them up. So this is, I put with the moon because of that beautiful moonbeam, and also the glove because it does talk about her sort of putting on her white gloves. The gloves actually could have gone for a few people, but there are actually white gloves in the image itself. So we can certainly see those connections. I was very happy to see Sylvia Plath. She was a poet from the, I don't know, she probably would have been born in the 1930s ish. I'm not good with remembering dates. But she killed herself at quite a young age, in her 30s, I believe. But she is an amazing writer, and I wrote, one of my favorite things that she wrote, one that I remember the most is The Bell Jar, which isn't listed in this suggested reading. She mostly wrote poetry, but The Bell Jar was a book that she wrote, and it was quite autobiographical, if memory serves. But I actually wrote a poem that references The Bell Jar, as well as things from Marge Piercy as well. So yeah, so there we have that. I have this one connected to, whoops, whoa, I totally threw everything. Because in the poetic writing of the book itself, it talks a lot about bees spilling from hollow arms and legs, bees swarming on, out to exact revenge, and these types of things. And so I connected that with the bees card that we have. And I know I can't take this long. I gotta pick up the pace. I understand. Here we have Toni Morrison. Of course, this is particularly poignant because the world just lost this month Toni Morrison, and I think is less of a lesser than because of that particular loss. But of course, Toni Morrison would be in here. Now, they of course recommended Beloved as the most magical, Song of Solomon and Sula for the ages, and as a, oh my goodness, there are children screaming outside. And as a banned book, The Bluest Eye. I would say, to be honest, The Bluest Eye was one of my favorites. I would say of her work, The Bluest Eye was my favorite. I have her, you can see there are spilled over milk here. Again, that ties in with some of the poetic writing that is there in the actual book. But I did, there's a direct correlation. We already talked about her. They talk in here about her mixing in her cauldron the words and then eating and swallowing the words. I'm gonna have to shut the window if they're gonna be screaming children. So the cauldron, obviously the cauldron could be for any of these authors. Joy Harjo, I thought that was really beautiful that she was there. I have definitely read, I took quite a lot of Native American lit because the teacher, the Native American teacher, lit teacher that was in my school was really fantastic, and she was Ojibwe, which was the little bit of Native American that our family has is Ojibwe, and so it was had a lot of great conversations with her. It was just interesting to talk to. So I took a lot of her classes because I quite enjoyed her. So I was excited to see. So I've definitely read quite a few of her works, and she was a First Nations, I believe, Creek. I'm going to pull this up here. Yes. And her name means so brave she's crazy. She courageously survived an oppressive childhood, teenage pregnancy, and domestic abuse before becoming a spiritually charged poet of the wild natural imagery and urgent social activism, as well as an award-winning saxophone player and singer. Recommended. She Had Some Horses is definitely recommended, and the poem How We Became Human, definitely, and the memoir Crazy Brave. Yeah, good suggestions there. So I was happy to see her. You could have done the apple. There was an apple that she talks about her feeding the horses, but she's surrounded in wildflowers, so I had saw the wildflower card with hers. We have Flannery O'Connor then up next, who is a Southern writer, a Southern Gothic writer, and definitely peacocks. The chickens would also go here because she loved chickens and she loved her peacocks, and I believe that she anyway, she was quite in love with her chickens. So this is what they're talking about in the thing. So that's why I connected her with the peacock here. And so that's why I chose that. I don't believe that I've read any of her books. If I had to guess, I would say that I have not. I have heard of her, but I don't believe I've ever read any of her works. We have Sappho next. I really like that they included Sappho. She was a poet, a Greek poet, poetess, I suppose, right back in, they have 630 to 570 BCE. And I don't believe, have any full pieces of work of Sappho's left. I think we have more people talking about her. Plato called her the 10th muse, and her reputation has survived to this day. She certainly wrote about love between women. So this, of course, in this, you know, she was just ahead of her. I don't even want to say that. I think that a lot of times people say ahead of their times as if, you know, things such as same-sex relationships are something that is new, and so she was sort of ahead of her time to see that as something that was natural, when, you know, if it's natural, it's been natural all this time. And of course, and she was talking about it in her time period. So I don't know if that ahead of her time is the quite way to say it. But anyways, I do think it was really beautiful that they added her in, because you do have this really old context for women writers talking about sexuality and love and things of that nature, and being revered for it. So I was happy to see that. And she's associated in the book with wings. So, and there is a wing card. I do not want to slaughter this lovely, this is an Iranian poet and filmmaker. I did not know this person. I love this particular image. There's something just so simple and beautiful, I think, about the artist's creation of this image. This also does directly have a wall. I also picked a tree, although a tree could have gone in many other ones as well. But I picked a tree here because the poetic writing about her has her turning into a tree, and it's really, really beautiful. In fact, I'm going to read it real quick because it's just beautiful. Tired of being a woman, Faru turns into acacia tree, stars in her branches and fish in the pond at her feet. She waits for her lover to come. At last the wind arrives. He blows around her limbs, embracing. The acacia's veins flood with wine, but the wind doesn't stay for long. He moves on through the lonely field, and the wine in Faru's veins brims with agony. Workers in the field, disturbed by the acacia's female form, are those breasts in the bark? Chop the tree down. When the tree falls, the men see a woman's naked spirit rise from the acacia. They never speak of it, but each man is haunted by his vision. Now the spirit of the acacia visits dying gardens throughout Iran. She goes wherever there is parched land or neglected flower beds. She floats over withered leaves, wilted geraniums, and lilacs. Listening to her songs of love, the roots tingle, the buds swell, fish return to the ponds, and the trees sway, a strange drunkenness in their sap. So it sounds like she writes a lot about sexuality and things of that nature, and sort of how she climbed out of her wall, I suppose. But imagery, and also the pond. There was a pond card that I didn't think had any direct reference, but you can see that they also referenced the pond there. So just beautiful. The book is well worth getting. Continue. Of course, we have Emily Dickinson. There wasn't anything directly relating here. We do have what looks on first glance as a black cat. I thought on first glance, but it's actually a mink. I think you could probably you could put a book with any of them, but the fact that they found like so much poetry right from her, I think it's in this little subset, but like 1,800 poems neatly folded in a drawer. 1,800 poems. That is a lot of poetry. And so Yeah. Also the white dress, and that's another one I didn't connect, and that is talking about the white dress. There is a white dress card. I think I might have stuck that with somebody else too. But there is a white dress card, and that would definitely go here. It's not the same white dress here that it's talking about, but it does talk about her in a white dress. So Emily Dickinson as the soul. I haven't even been saying what these keywords are. I'm just so thrilled with it. You know, you can read it. I understand. Octavia Butler, the future. I wonder if we have past, present as well. Family, fate, the dark, power. Yes, to Toni Morrison. Endurance, bravery, humanity, love, rebellion against those walls. And then we have the soul here with Emily Dickinson. So, okay, keeping on going. Here we have Audre Lorde, who was a poet, essayist, and civil rights activist. And she was born in New York to West Indian parents, and loudly and proudly proclaimed herself a black lesbian feminist. Witchiest poems is The Black Unicorn, famous essays The Sister Outsider, and a biomythographical novel. I just love that word, period. Is Zame, A New Spelling of My Name. And we have this as Justice. Again, I just really think, you know, what we get in this little blurb here is, you know, your basic things. And it does give you, you know, some key elements to key in on what type of a literary witch they might have been. But boy, do the three pieces of poetic prose, in my opinion, really make the authors come alive. I put a snail, there's a snail card, because it talks about how she writes a lot about the erotic, unicorns, snails eating dead snakes, witches, fire, and the importance of refusing silence, period. But there was a snail here, so I put a snail there. Here's my beloved Angela Carter, a British author of fiction and fairy tales. I was sad that I don't think they recommended, oh they did, Burlesque Night at the Circus, yeah. The Bloody Chamber is a set of short stories there that I have as well. So she definitely did versions of Little Red Riding Hood, Beauty and the Beast, and things like that. And definitely the claw. There is a claw. I didn't put this right with it because the wolf and Virginia Woolf, they kind of are both showing a wolf in the card themselves. There's also the beast's claw that I have with Mary Shelley, but could very easily or should very easily go with Angela Carter as well. So that beast claw definitely does double duty, as does the wolf there. So Angela Carter for identity, which I think is really well done. Virginia Woolf, we have Vision here. She was a British literary witch. And she also has a collection of essays that were really important discussions about women in literature, how they were written about, how they wrote, and understanding the dynamics of what it takes to even have the space and time to have written, as when you look back, and especially in older times with women, you know, they had to have a certain degree of privilege to even be able to write, and to have the space to think and the space to be able to write. That's really powerful. So we have that here with Virginia Woolf, and then the Wolf card. Sandra Cisneros is next, who was a Mexican-American writer, born in 1954. I believe she is still alive. Yes, she's still alive. I love this image. There's something powerful here. I do not believe I have read The House on Mango Street. I have heard of it, but I don't think I have read it. I believe I have read some of her short stories, though, in one of the classes that I took. This one I attached with the braid card because in this, when it's talking about, in the Poetic, the book itself for this deck, it talks about women trapped in husbands' and fathers' houses wake up with their hair cut off, braided into ropes. Use this to climb out, read the notes tied on with ribbon. Out the window, down in the street, Sandra winks and opens her arms. So, you know, cut off your hair and use that as the escape, you know, there. So having that cut off braid is obviously, to me, a reference to that. Now, I did not find something, no, I ended up doing the white dress as well, but I think this would probably have been, could have gone to the other one that I talked about also. But this one I really couldn't find something exactly to, which is too bad. I would have liked, there could have been some cool things. This is a really powerful, or the one thing that I have read of hers is called The Yellow Wallpaper. And this was a reflection or an interesting example of what happens to, they used to have rest cures, and she was given a rest cure when she had postpartum depression, where she was locked in a room for quite an extended amount of time until, you know, they bring on, you know, delusion. The cure was you know, brought on delusions and things in the wallpaper, opening up into worlds, other worlds and things of that nature. Very powerful piece there. If you can find that to read, I highly suggest it. I think I also read one of her, I don't know how many she had, but I think she has a novel called Sheland or Herland or something. Let me look if it's recommended. Yeah, Herland. So yeah, that is Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it's freedom as the keyword. Next we have Jamaica Kincaid, and she is an Antiguan American author. She was born in Antigua, which is an island, and it's definitely, the poetic part talks a lot about lions, which might be that there are lions in some of her writing. I don't believe I've ever read any of hers unless they were short. I've read a lot of mixes of short stories and things like that in classes, so unless there was maybe a short story, I'm definitely going to look up, because I love short stories. They're one of my favorite things to write, and they're also, I love to read them. They're just extended poetry if there's somebody's really good at it. So I've got a note to look up some of her short stories, because they were, especially one called At the Bottom of the River, was recommended, so I can't wait to get hers. Then we have Anne Carson for the intellect. This, they say, is a Canadian poet and classicist who is still alive. Now, I've connected this with the volcano because I don't really know a lot about this particular person. And although it was quite interesting to read her little blurb where it talks about how deals with lost family members, love and lust, religion and intellectual tradition. She is also a scholar of ancient Greek and Latin texts and a champion of fellow witches, having translated Sappho and written about Emily Bronte and Virginia Woolf. So she has a volcano here in her hand. We have a volcano card. Here we have Leslie Marmon Silko. And the keyword here is community. I quite like this image, and I don't know if you can tell, but there are like spider webs in the sides, or around the sides. This is from there. This person, I believe, is still alive as well, and she is, I think, a Laguna Pueblo, Mexican, European, and Cherokee ancestry. And she wrote a book called Ceremony. Don't believe I've read that before. So yeah, I'll be interested to catch up on her. And I, again, put her with, I love the spider card. Here we have Alejandra Pizimic for Solitude. This is an interesting art as well. I quite like the art in this deck, to be honest. Even though it isn't what I would typically think of as art style that I like, I do really think it's beautiful. She is from Argentina, but her parents are Russian Jewish. So she spoke Yiddish and Spanish, but she wrote in Spanish. I'm looking, I don't think I've read any of her things either. We have her as Solitude. Again, even though I haven't read anything of a couple of these people, when you read the book, not the guidebook, again, unfortunately, I know that's confusing, but the actual book that came first, The Literary Witches, the poetic prose there just really makes you have that connection to them. Because there's a beautiful writing about paper women playing paper hearts. And then you realize that if you don't leave now, you too will turn into a paper doll. Now this isn't a paper doll, it's a doll, but I put that with it. I love the artwork on this one too. This is Mirabai, I think is perhaps how that is pronounced. This is a Hindu mystic from the 15th century, I would say. She cut off her hair for Krishna. It sounds like she wrote a lot of devotional poetry to Krishna, and the story is that she kind of disappeared. You know, maybe Krishna took her, and or she just continued on her own. I have her connected with the elixir because part of the poetic thing is about poison becomes ashamed of itself in her presence, and it blushes and turns into holy elixir. She's so devout that even poison turns into elixir. So I thought that was pretty cool. And here we have the elixir. Here we have Anais Nin, of course, not too surprising there. She is an author and and what we talk about, it talks about all of these different eyes and eyelids and things, and there's eyes all over this image here, and so I pulled the eye card. So I think you can see, obviously, at this point that the kind of secondary deck of cartomancy style images are directly related to things about the different authors, and I think that, again, I wanted to see whether that was the case, and I think it's held to be true, and I quite like that added connective layer, or rather just being separate things stuck together, which was one of my concerns. Here we have Gertrude Stein, of course, which we would expect, or I would say we would expect. And she could have been the spider web too, because it did talk a lot about, or the poetic prose about this talked about spider weaving a web, so that was there. But they also talk about, trying to find it. For Gertrude, each word is a hedgehog in a metal cage. So they talk about hedgehogs. So that's why I put hedgehog with Gertrude Stein. This one is Yumiko Kurahashi, Transformation. I have not heard of her before. She's a Japanese, or she was a Japanese surrealist. And I had not read any of hers. They say she is a badass of experimental fiction, is almost entirely unknown among English speakers, which I will say I have definitely not heard of her. Although some of the titles, like The Woman with the Flying Head and other stories, sounded interesting. Definitely looked like some of the recommended readings were fairy tales, and cruel fairy tales for adults, cruel fairy tales for old people, and so forth. So definitely piqued my interest to see what that was all about. And definitely a lot of ghosts and things of that nature. So I have the ghost, although this could have gone with many different of the authors. I was so excited to see Agatha Christie. I used to back in my early adulthood, so probably in the 90s. I think I had a whole collection of all of the Agatha Christie books at the time. Well, it would have been all of them probably, because she died before I was reading them. But my family extended for like aunts and things like that. I know I had one particular aunt who knew I liked Agatha Christie, and so would always find like copies in garage sales and stuff like that, and always grab them for me. And so I think I had pretty much the full collection of her books. I certainly read them all. I'm not a person that really is into murder mysteries or anything like that anymore. That was like a chunk of time in which I was, which I think is kind of interesting in and of itself, but I quite enjoyed them. And so we see there is a noose here. There's also a knife. There's a couple that could, but it's kind of that whodunit, right? Was it with a knife in the drawing room, like the Clue game? So the noose we can see hanging off of there. The knife is here again. There's a couple cards that have a knife in it. But she is a murder mystery. I was a little bit surprised to find her here, although I will say, just like some of the other authors here, you know, she was writing in a field that there probably was very few females writing. She wrote nearly 70, so I did not have them all, though some were combination books. Nearly 70 detective novels, making her the most popular novelist in all of history. Is that really the case? That seems, wow. Taking place in a British aristocracy of luxury trains, handsome estates, and butlers, her books keep the reader guessing about the truth behind their murders until the shocking twists are revealed. Yeah, as I said, I quite loved her, and very prolific, clearly. And again, I think that we would have, or people would have assumed that murder mysteries and things were certainly well in the realm of the man's game. Here we have Janet Frame with the keyword of belonging. What is her mystery? No, trickery. Who done it? I have not heard of Janet Frame before. I have read the book, but not the book, but the Literary Witches book piece on her. She is from New Zealand and was a novelist. She has an eel on the card, and there is an eel in the deck itself. Her brother had epilepsy. She spent a lot of time in psychiatric wards, lots of electroshock treatments. Oh my goodness. And apparently wrote autobiographical fiction about hospitalization in the displaced South. Definitely interested in a couple of the suggested books. Looked really interesting and poignant. So she's another that I'm going to try to find some things on. I love the image on this card too. This is one of my favorites. Maria Sabina was a Mazatec healer and oral poet in the late 1800s through the 1900s. She was born in 1894 and lived till 1985. What an interesting span of years, isn't it? She could not read or write and lived in poverty in the mountains of southern Mexico. She's considered the greatest shaman poet or wise one of the Mazatec language. She apparently improvised chants during mushroom-induced ceremonies performed to heal the sick. Apparently there is a blend of, her spiritual path was like a blend of Mazatec beliefs combined with Catholicism. And there is a book, The Life Story, Chants, and Context of Maria Sabina. So that sounds really interesting too. And I have, of course, the mushroom here. Here we have Mary Shelley, 1797 to 1851. The key word they have for her is loss, which makes sense. She was married to Shelley, the poet, and he died drowned in a boating accident. I know the majority of her, she lost the majority of her children. She lost her mother at a young age, who was a very prominent feminist of the time, very well spoken. So she did go through a lot of losses in her life. So yeah, so we have her. I have her with a skull, which could have gone with somebody else as well, but of course the creature's paw, although it really isn't a creature so much as actual hands, but you can, they look like that's what they pulled from. So again, these are coming directly from the images themselves. And then I think the last one, yep, is Zora Neale Hurston. And she is a Harlem Renaissance folklorist and anthropologist. I don't know that I've read anything about hers from her. She, let's see, I'm going to, oh yes, no, of course I have. Their eyes were watching God. I thought her name sounded familiar. I love this image with these imps here. There's also a rabbit, which I didn't associate with anybody, but there we have a rabbit. We have a rabbit. The skull could have definitely gone here. It talks about the in the poetic part of it. It talks about her carrying apples around, telling, you know, almost like when she gains a story, or when she tells a story, she gains an apple, and so having this huge basket full of apples it talks about. So we have the apple there, the skull could have gone there, the rabbit could have gone there, that type of thing. She apparently wrote about black women owning themselves a lot, but she also collected folk tales from around the South and into the Caribbean. So, oh, what does it say about the first? She initiated into voodoo once by boiling a live black cat and passing its bones over her lips, and took the first known photograph of a zombie. Interesting. Interesting woman there. But their eyes were watching God is certainly probably what people would have heard of her from. So there we have it. I'm going to zoom back out. Those are the 30 literary witches and or amazing storytellers and interesting people. The cardstock is linen and really gorgeous. I missed, there was one that talked about women, part women and part black cats, and it ended with sort of, you see a flick of a tail behind you and you don't know if it's your own or not. So the black cat kind of went with that. So truthfully, you know, the chickens I know went with one. So there's just, out of the 40 figure cards, there's only 3 that I couldn't connect directly to someone. And again, my guess is if I knew more about certain works, I might know what those relate to. But the bulk of, almost the entirety of the Lenormand style deck are directly connected with the personages, and that makes me very happy. So I think there's a couple things. I'm going to pause this while I trim this so that you can see it trimmed. They shuffle really beautifully. Kind of makes me a little leery to cut them because they won't shuffle as nice, but they do riffle beautifully. My thinking is, I mean, you can just shuffle them together, which I'll do later. But my thinking, and I know when I was talking to Larissa about this, is that you could pull... hello, my Miss Shelley. See, now that's just meant to be. That's meant to be and caught on video. Nobody can say that that was a wishful thinking pull. Bam! Miss Mary Shelley coming with a message. So that's my thinking, was to grab one of the storytellers, you know, read up on them if I don't know, maybe find a short story or piece of theirs that I wanted to sit and read, and then also get a message by pulling, say, 3 cards from the secondary deck. Here we have house. Here we have eye. And here we have chicken. Okay, so let's take a look. I'll show you the guidebook. So house, I mean, obviously with Lenormand, that is something that you see a lot in terms of security, the sense of private space. I don't know that that's how they have this. Stability, it can lead to stagnation if you're staying in the house all the time, and family. So I would definitely read it similar to that. This is the space in which you should feel safe, the space in which you can feel secure, of course being careful that it's not turning into a prison as well there, but that sense of security and stability. The eye is one that you actually see a lot in fortune-telling, older fortune-telling decks. It can have to do with sort of the third eye and intuition and things of that nature. Seeking answers, seeing clearly and paying attention. So it's more maybe about the gaze and about watching, right? Paying attention to, in order for to have stability and security, to pay attention to chickens. I like some eggs. Let's see what the chicken is here in this deck. I would say, you know, the abundance of laying eggs and paying careful attention, seeing clearly, leading to sort of something that self-perpetuates. If you have chickens, you've got the eggs, and you can have that ongoing going out and getting the eggs, and there is that continuous cycle that's there of abundance or that you're gaining. They would say the cackle, ancient past and lore. That is interesting. I'm not sure what would associate that. There obviously must be something in one of the writers. I've read most of the main blurbs. The one that I did see about, I did see one about chickens. Let me find that one. Oh, which one was it? It was the one that likes peacocks. Flannery O'Connor. I thought they said something about chickens. Flannery learns the language of chickens. She squawks a song irresistible to her peacocks, and dozens fly in through the window. The peacocks serenade her with their tails and amuse her with petty talk. When Flannery loses all her hair, they bite off their own feathers to crown her with a headdress. Yeah, I'm sure this relates to somebody in terms of the ancient past and lore. This could also do with the last one that we talked about, of the idea of sacrificing chickens and things of that nature. But that's how I would probably read a chicken. It's better to keep a chicken and have eggs continually than to just eat the chicken. And that's how you just get one meal, right? Setting it up so that things are kind of self-perpetuating. That's the message I got out of it. That's okay. We can all get different messages. And then if we were to look at the people themselves, right? So here we do have, and I did want to point out that I think I already did, but these are alphabetical by their last names. So you can go to Shelley, find them relatively quickly. But this is about the cycle of life, transitions and attachments. Letting go, being able to let go. You know, she has the figure for loss here. So finding stability and security is keeping paying attention to setting up things that can self-perpetuate, can bring in healing and abundance on a regular basis. That's kind of how I'm reading that particular message. But I'll sit with this for a little bit longer, because how awesome is it that I got her as my very first pull. very awesome. So let me take a picture of this and then I'll mix them together and do a pull so that you can see that before I trim the deck. Okay, so I have proof that Mary Shelley was my first. So I'm going to just mix them together here. Although I think that's how I'm going to use them. But they may be perfectly wonderful this way as well. It's a bit of a handful. Ooh, bad shuffle, bad shuffle. Ooh, not good. It's very thick, which is nice, thick linen, but it is a handful, and I'm pretty good at thicker riffle shuffling. I definitely bent one of the cards just like, it's not bent, thankfully, so it will go back into shape. The cardstock is, like I said, linen. I've got a deck from this same company, and it riffles nicely, like it shuffles well, but I definitely put a bender on that one. Do as I say, not as I do. There it is. Let me fix that one. Just kind of run it along an edge. Go. I'll make sure to keep it in the middle when I put it away. Yeah, it's already a lot better. Okay, so that's it all together. So here we have Emily Dickinson, love. Second one, we have Sandra Cisneros. So we have the soul and the body and the toad. Very transformational energy with frogs and toads for me. They're also, of course, because we're talking about stories, it makes me think of you know, how many toads or frogs are you going to kiss in order to find the prince kind of idea. Go out and become your own princess without looking for the prince. I don't know. I don't know that I would use it this way, to be honest. I'm not feeling it as much, but that could very much be because I've already gotten it in my head, because I've been thinking about this before I bought the deck, because I've been talking to Larissa about it, and I kind of have had it in my head. Here we have community vision. So our vision for our community is, now I know the milk has to do with nostalgia, going back to childhood, I believe something along those natures, also sustenance, but let's see, as we get to know, nourishment, yep, parents and nostalgia. So how can we reignite community vision with the way things were? Now that can be in a good way, but that can also be in a negative sense of remembering the past, right? Remembering our parentage in some ways. How can we nourish the community by, you know, how can our vision for the community be more nourishing, is how I might read that as well with the milk. So, I mean, it very well could work. I'm definitely going to give it a fair go both ways, because I do kind of feel like my head's kind of set on doing it the one way, and I do want to give it its fair go. So here's, again, final look. Now I'm going to trim it. Okay, so a little bit, oh, there you go. I have done a lot of research. If you have a classical guitar, which I just picked up a cheap classical guitar, and I did a lot of research on the best folk strings to put on, there you go. Tip from me to you. I haven't put them on yet, but I will be. Okay, so I'm just back. I did go ahead and trim up the rest of the deck, and I'm really happy with how it looks trimmed. I really like the look of all of the cards. I like the, again, there was such defined, you know, all of these had a very solid background, light but solid. There was no purpose for the white border. And then again, these were all framed, very solid frames on them. So the border to me didn't serve really any purpose. And I do think the back looks really good. Now, I will say, This is fairly thick cardstock, and I will say it's probably not my best trim, and the reason for that was I think you need to pick whether you are going to cut from the face or from the back, and I would recommend cutting from the back because what I did was these were so light and I don't have the greatest eyesight and it was night, and so I trimmed because this is white on tan, so I cut from the back because it was just easier to see, and you really couldn't see if it wasn't perfect on this side here because it's so light. But then on these, I very often cut from the face because I wanted to make sure there wasn't any other white edges. It's fairly, at least my deck was fairly precisely placed on the backing. 2 thumbs up to Clarkson Potter Press. But you would, if you did it from the back on these darker ones, you would sometimes need to come in and clean up a little white strip. If you did it from the face, you sometimes needed to clean up a little bit on the back. But it was, you know, fairly minor. So my recommendation is do them all from the back and then clean up what you need to clean up, because I think you would get a much more, and this doesn't bother me that much, but I just know most of my trims are much smoother than this one turned out, and I really do believe it's because I was flip-flopping between the cutting from the back and cutting from the front. So pick one side. You know, you may be perfectly fine cutting these from the front. I had a hard time seeing them. If you're going to cut them all from the face or all from the back is my opinion. So they still shuffle fine. Whenever you trim the edges, just always be aware of this. When you trim the edges, you will reduce the smoothness of a riffle shuffle. Now again, if you're not a riffle shuffler, it's not going to matter one way or another. But if you are a riffle shuffler, trimming that and not, I think, having perfectly smooth edges is going to cause it to be a less smooth riffle. So that's just, and it's, some cardstocks don't have that problem, but the thicker the cardstock is, the more that becomes a problem in my experience. Overhand shuffling, I don't think it matters. In fact, I think it made it a lot easier to overhand shuffle because it is a fairly chunky deck. It's 70 cards, so it's close to a tarot. It's thick cardstock, and it just makes it easier in the hand for overhand shuffling. So, oops. I've done some readings with this. I'm really enjoying it. But I will say, so there's that. You can see it without the borders. Right, so if the message here is focused on Octavia Butler, it's focused on the future, it's focused on how are we going to interact with other people, including other races, but how are we going to do better? Like Octavia Butler, because of that one statement in the book, this idea we should be doing better, we could be doing better, right? Excuse me. So I think about the future and how could we be doing better. And we have this idea of wings, which to me is about flight. It's about movement here, right? Our flight should be one of bravery. Our movement forward, we need to step forward into this new future with bravery. We need to fly forward with bravery to the moon. But to those dark places as well, right? To those deep places. If we want to change the future, right? If we want to make an impact and do better in the future, then we have to fly forward bravely into those spaces that are less clear, that are darker, and deal with those issues with bravery. So I think I have found, as an Oracle deck, it works really well. And I think that the reasoning for me is, well, and I also love this style of, you know, I read Kipper, I read Lenormand, I love the Mildred Payne. I love fortune-telling style decks. I'm very comfortable with them, so that makes these cards to me very comfortable. I still lean towards, it's worked in both ways for me, but I will say that I do enjoy just getting a message from a single author. and having, okay, so we're going to talk about fate here, right? And then maybe doing either a 3-card reading at the top here, or I've definitely found, especially with it being trimmed, you could so easily, and there's again 40 cards, right? So remember that 40 of these cards, so that is larger than a Lenormand deck. In which I do 9 cards all of the time. And so you could very easily pick a central author and topic, read about that particular author especially if you get the extra book, which I'm still going to say, if you really want to dive into this deck, I do think the book, again, it's on Amazon, at least the last I checked, for like $7. I think it's well worth having that if this is something that interests you. That's going to help you with diving into the authors. It's not going to help you with this part. But dive into that, to read that poetic meaning, dive into that energy, and then read the cards around it is amazing. Or just do a 9-card with them all mixed together. I think because I love this style, and I just like the idea of really sinking into one of their voices, that's probably where I'll lean to. But I will say, having used this for some readings and things, that it works quite well as an oracle deck combined as well. So you don't feel like you have to do that whatsoever. There definitely seems to be great energy surrounding it, with it mixed together as well, and it works well. So there you go. I just wanted to come back once it was all trimmed. I don't know, somebody did ask me on Instagram if I was going to edge it. Obviously, if I edged it at all, it would be in black, which is, I think, great for the author cards, and probably perfectly fine with the other. It doesn't bother me too much, or probably clean up some of my edges, but this isn't white like this white is, so heck, why not? I think I need a new chunky Sharpie though, so I will put that on my list, and probably eventually will edge it in black, but I'm okay with it the way it is right now. It still seats really nicely in the box. Yes, there's wiggle room, but it's not terrible amount. They're not going to come flying out of that container thing. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this, and have a absolutely wonderful rest of your day.